Hello. All right. Good evening, my colleagues, Dr. Rogers, administration staff, parents, and students. Welcome to our October 18th Board of Education meeting. We have, before the meeting begins, we will stand for the pledge, and I ask everyone to remain standing after the pledge. We will do a moment of silence. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing. We have many community members who are in mourning over the loss of loved ones in the last week. We would like to have a moment of silence for them for now. So. Thank you. You may take a seat now. Our community is hurting, and our hearts are with you at this time. We are thinking of all of you during this difficult time. The mental health resources in the district remain available to those students who may be affected. Tonight, we come in and recognize the National Merit Scholarship semifinalists for their dedication to learning. This recognition not only marks the milestone in their academic achievements, but also sets a standard of excellence for all students to aspire to. Let's welcome Dr. Ray Laverso, our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessments, to distribute the certificates. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very kind. I did not win any of these awards, but I do appreciate the applause. When I first arrived in Syosset, I was in awe because within my first month, I noted how many National Merit Scholarship semifinalists we had. I've come from schools where 2 was a very big deal, 10 was a very big deal. This year we have 35. And I think it just speaks volumes about our kids, their dedication to their learning, the types of students they are, the types of people they are, and the people that they're going to become. I'm honored to be here. Dr. Durante had another commitment this evening, so I'm honored to be here to represent the high school and honor our 35 semifinalists. So this year, our semifinalists are Jessica Albrecht, Alex Chen, you could hold your applause to the end, Andy Chen, Scout Chen, Ria Dulia, Darius Fan, Matthew Finkel, Anushka George, Jamie Guo, Sean Guo, Nathalia Guzman, Benjamin Hasselbring, Griffin Han, Vincent Huang, Ashley Huang, Simeon Her, Sabina Kim, Jesse LeBolt, Brenton Lee, Caitlin Lee, Maxwell Lee, Samuel Liu, Hagen Liu, James Masson, Blesson Ren, Aryan Shah, Abaram Shringanesh, Emily Sue, Arya Tooley, Benjamin Vitali, Ryan Wei, Samuel Zhao, Nicholas Yang, Wendy Yin, and Ann Zhang. Congratulations. We're all very proud of you. Congratulations.
So you may not realize this is a School Board Appreciation Week, and no one appreciates the school board more than those who take advantage of the school district and the programs that the school board makes available. And representing the parents of all those students who get to take advantage of what's here in the district are our co-presidents of the Syosset Council of PTAs. So I'd like to invite them to come to the podium because they have a presentation that they would like to make to the Board of Education.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. Okay, I am Jen Abraham. This is Jody Rakito. And we are the Syosset Council of PTA's co-presidents. Every year, the New York State School Board Association sponsors School Board Recognition Week. The week honors board members' commitment to public education. As the association states, school board members take on the most important citizen responsibilities, overseeing the education of the community's youth. What may be often forgotten is that school board members are volunteers. The gift of your time, expertise, and commitment is critical to the success of our district. You balance your role as a school board member with work, family, and other volunteering positions. All of us in the PTA understand the challenges and opportunities that volunteerism can bring. We know you share our belief that working to promote the welfare of every child makes it all worth it.
We are happy to recognize your efforts on this special week, but please know we appreciate your work all year long. On behalf of all of the PTAs in Syosset, we present a small token of our appreciation, along with a certificate from the New York State School Board Association, signed by Dr. Rogers. The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. And with this fire, we hope that Syosset School District continues to shine bright. We thank you for your leadership and tireless support for every student in our community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our Syosset Council of PTAs, co-presidents, for the wonderful token of appreciation. Your dedication to our students and community is greatly appreciated. It's an honor to work together for the betterment of our students in our schools. Thank you again. Thank you. Okay, all right, so we are going to begin our the Board of Education meeting on the discussion of for facilities. Before I do that, I just want to say something. At the end of the October 3rd meeting, the board passed a resolution for a donation of a bench from the Daggett family in memory of their beloved son, Ben. This meaningful gesture will forever remind us of his spirit and the importance of unity during time of loss. Thank you to the Daggett family for their kindness and for allowing us to honor his memory in this beautiful way. Thank you. Okay. And now we will begin our discussion items on the facilities. So the board began the discussion of facilities a couple months ago, and we've been doing a lot of that in the past few meetings. The administration, our architect, also the construction manager company has been presenting us with a lot of information to allow the board to make decisions. And for today's discussion, we will frame them around a few questions that we need to give the Dr. Rogers the guidance. And these questions, so that you guys have those questions in mind, the board has to decide whether we are going on a 7-year or 10-year cycle for facilities project. So that's the one, so keep that in mind. And number two, how do we want to do the 2 elementary schools, and that is Walt Whitman and Berry Hill, and how expensive do we want to do those? The third would be, how do we want to proceed with the Woodbury School, and that's the building at the corner of Jericho Turnpike and Woodbury Road. And that building has been sitting there vacant for years, for all the years that I could remember. So that's the question that the board should have in mind to think about how to give the administration the directions. And then the next one would be, how much additional do we want to do aside from what we already have? And do we want to, another one is, if the board would like to continue to build on the HBT track or the Syosset, the high school additional gym space to allow for the bubble that's coming to the high school. And these are the questions that we want to focus on today. Anything outside of these 5 questions, we can talk about them, but just not today. We'll talk about them in the future. It's very important that we give the central administration the guidance and directions so they can proceed with the next steps. Okay. All right. With that, anyone wish to speak about this at all?
A little bit of a presentation for the board.
Oh, sure.
Thank you for your discussion 2 weeks ago. The team felt it was very helpful for us to start to narrow our work to focus on your priorities. You asked a lot of thoughtful questions about how to frame the choices that are before you, and that also informed our getting back to you. I feel like every time we have these meetings, I go away with homework, but this is a school, so that seems appropriate that everyone here has to do homework. So I wanted to follow up on a number of the points that were made at the last meeting and try to frame some of these questions for you. So what I heard 2 meetings ago was that everyone on the board was exploring ways to try and use the Woodbury School. I didn't hear a lot of enthusiasm on the board for not finding a use for the Woodbury School. So we've been working hard on trying to identify ways to use it. So as with each meeting, we have refined our diligence on the building more closely. So the last round of investigation was to do code compliance work. And when we started really going deep into the code compliance work, we discovered several things. One, even though it had been used as a school in the past, a lot of the spaces that were used as classroom spaces in the past would no longer meet the state ed criteria for classroom space. So when all was said and done, I think that we would have to combine spaces, and we would probably only be able to get 2 classroom spaces that meet current specs out of the building, just given the limitations that the building has. So even though at our last meeting we had suggested considering housing a couple of pre-K sections there as a way to use the building and as a way to generate state reimbursement on the rehabilitation costs, I don't think that that would be a cost-effective way to use the building, because you'd need so much infrastructure around those classrooms that having only 2 classrooms there, I don't think would make sense. The other thing, when we did code compliance, there are 2 different standards to which the building would be built. If it was E-occupancy, education occupancy, the requirements are a little bit different than if it is B occupancy, which would mean like for office space, business B. So we did look at what it would cost to take the whole building up to E occupancy, and that was about 15 million. We think it would be a little less than that, somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 million, to take it to B occupancy. But it's certainly an expensive undertaking, and as we've explored more closely some of the challenges with the building, we do think that there would probably be some requirements because of the historical nature of the property to maintain some of the more expensive approaches to construction and reconstruction, like, for example, replacing the slate roof in kind with a slate roof, which would be considerably more expensive than an asphalt roof, and other kinds of challenges like that. And anything that we do to change the amount of impermeable area, meaning parking, would require us to do a lot of work around compliance with drainage and water runoff. So the more we look at this building, the more daunting it becomes as a project. Certainly, it is something that we could convert to office space, office-only space. If we did that, it would be able to accommodate all of the people who are currently working in the business office here in Southwoods. That would free up classroom space in Southwoods to accommodate the coming enrollment bubble that is going to pass through. And it would also leave the district with a community room space that could be taken advantage of for not just the school district for meetings, but for members of the community to use. But again, it is, the more we look at the building, it was built in 1925 or 26, the more we're realizing that there are systems in the building, that electrical systems, heating systems, plumbing systems, that because they're now approaching 100 years old, it probably wouldn't be wise to do a lot of work on the building and not touch those systems more significantly. And the more we look at those, the more costly they appear to us. Just following up again on the HBT site plan that we spoke about last meeting, and illustrating where the track would be laid out on the property. We did some estimating on the costs associated with that as well. I know there's been a robust conversation about fencing at the HBT campus, and one thing that would need to be added in any event would be a fence around the track. So that would be an additional cost as we're, getting, again, refining our numbers a little bit more closely. At our last meeting, we presented you with a conceptual idea for Berry Hill. Berry Hill has experienced enrollment increase. It is very tight right now, and it has 7 classroom spaces that are not going to last indefinitely. So we know we have to replace those 7 classrooms. We also know that we don't have a lot of flexibility because the building is so full right now. And the last challenge with Berry Hill is that the property is very challenging because of the topography behind the building. There's no room to build in front, so your only choice is to build behind, and getting around the building to the back is challenging. Working on a slope is challenging and will require a lot of excavation and the building of retaining walls. And then there's not a lot of space to work with, so you'd have to do some sort of a multi-story approach. But the advantage of doing a multi-story approach is that you would have one level that is at the level of the playground in back of the building, and an elevator in this addition. So you would make the playground in back handicapped accessible in a way that it really isn't now. So that would be one advantage. And again, we started doing some code compliance work on this property. One thing that is missing in the property at present is a fire access road around the back of the building. So in any event, once we start doing rehabilitation of the campus, it's going to be necessary to build access to the back of the building. So if the fire department needs, for any reason, to locate equipment in the back of the building, they have a road that allows them to do that. So that, I was surprised at how extensive that project will end up being when the time comes, but that's been an additional refinement. So we approach this project in 2 ways. One is to think of just adding on 7 classrooms to replace the 7 classrooms that will not last indefinitely. And the other is to think about this more extensively and create 2 more rooms out of what is currently the cafeteria, relocate the cafeteria to what is currently the gym, and relocate the gym to a new facility on the back of the building. This appears similar to what it appears happened with the South Grove Elementary School a number of years ago. A new gym was built, and the old gym space was repurposed for other purposes within the building. At Walt Whitman, it's been a while since we've discussed this at a board meeting, so I just thought I would do a refresher. Similar consideration and approach. There are 3 portables in the front of the building. Again, they will not last indefinitely. Because during any period of construction, we would need to keep those in place. You would want to add on to the building, not try to replace them in the current location. So you could add on to the building at the north side, and then that would permit you to add a new gym where the existing portables are, and doing so would allow you to repurpose the gym space inside the building for a cafeteria, a music room, et cetera, and that would free up more classroom space inside the building. We're obviously looking at our enrollment projections, and for both Whitman and Berry Hill, our projections are for them to crest and level out and maybe even go back down a little bit. But again, these are projections and are probably subject to market forces. We've been doing a little bit of analysis, again, at the board's request from several meetings ago, to try and get firmer estimates from town and county officials as to the amount of new construction that's taken place in Syosset. I'm not prepared to say that we've got that down to the very last one, but we're seeing in the neighborhood of 70, 80 houses, new residences that have been built in the area, much of that in the Woodbury area. So, we're certainly attentive to the development activity that has been taking place. The other portable replacement projects are much less daunting, and the portables are in better shape than those at Berry Hill and Whitman. So those would be Village Elementary School. As we've done a more thorough analysis of how we would actually go about constructing this at Village, it would make more sense, as with Whitman, to build the portables first, not portables, to build new classrooms first, and then knock down the existing portables. That would free up some space at the end of the parking lot, so we could expand the parking lot, because additional parking is something that has been of interest at that building as well. But that is a more straightforward project. And then at Bayless Elementary School, right now the portables are at the end of one wing. You could replace those with classrooms at the end of another wing. And if you ever needed to go back and add 2 more classrooms in the future, the location where the existing portables are would still be available to you to do that. So those 2 projects, I think, look a lot more straightforward to us, to the team, than the Berry Hill and Whitman projects do. The board has asked us, the team, a lot of questions about traditional masonry construction and pre-manufactured construction. And I believe I understand the board to be wanting to make sure that you are putting together, if you were to go in the direction of using pre-manufactured construction, that the quality would be comparable to traditional construction and that the lifespan would be comparable to traditional construction. And we presented you with 2 different price points for pre-manufactured construction. At a lower price point than traditional masonry, the lifespan would be a little less because the finishes would not be as robust. But if you spend the same amount as you spend on traditional masonry, you'll get the same kind of finishes and the same kind of lifespan. The advantage of the pre-manufactured is that the site work and the construction occur simultaneously instead of sequentially. So with traditional masonry construction, you can't start doing the construction itself until the site work is done. And that basically puts you back about a year. With the pre-manufactured construction, the 2 things happen simultaneously. And so typically, once the site work is done, you're able to drop the pre-manufactured pieces into place and move very quickly. So given the fact that a couple of the buildings, Whitman and Berry Hill, are tight, pre-manufactured gives you the advantage of not having to wait. And with all of the portable replacements, the advantage of not waiting a year means that you forego a year's worth of inflation in the cost of construction. So I think there's some wisdom to pursuing it in any event, not just at the tricky sites, because you're going to forego some cost escalation due to inflation. So the upgraded level of pre-manufactured construction are called Type 2B pre-manufactured buildings, and they are comparable to traditional masonry construction. I've included some photographs of a school in Plain Edge that is a 3-story school that was made with pre-manufactured building process, and they've offered us an invitation to go visit, so I'd like to take them up on that invitation so that we can go and get a sense of it. So we saw one school in Hicksville that was built to a different standard, and now we'll have an opportunity to see a school in Plain Edge that was built to a higher standard. And my understanding is this building is 15 or 20 years old at this point, so you'll also have the opportunity to see how well this building has how well it has stood up to wear over a fairly significant amount of time. We've talked in the past about the athletics facility in the abstract. I thought it would be worth spending a few minutes to just talk about it in a little bit more detail. We've been noting the contrast in the amount of athletic space that's available here in Syosset relative to some neighboring school districts, and trying to benchmark a little bit against what their facilities are like. But ultimately, there's two things that we're trying to do with our facilities. One, we want to run a good physical education program during the day, and we're short on instructional spaces and instructional stations for classes. So sometimes classes have to double up or triple up in the gyms that we do have in order to make sure every student is meeting the physical education mandate from the state. But we are experiencing some limitations. And then the other, of course, is after school, our athletic teams take advantage of these spaces. And I knew that we had grown. I was actually startled when we pulled the numbers and realized that participation in athletics has grown 60% in the past decade, which is remarkable and wonderful. We've offered, the board has supported offering new sports for our youngsters to play, and those sports have been tremendously popular, and we've grown a little bit as a student body as well, and so that has resulted in some growth in these programs too. And we have now 1,600 students who are participating in our athletic programs. So finding space to accommodate all of them has been challenging, and what the district does now is we rent space off campus, but that incurs a busing cost for us to get our students to the places where they practice and play so they can take advantage of it. We've looked at a couple of different approaches. At the most modest end would be what is called an air-supported structure, but is more commonly known as a bubble. And you could do something that was traditional masonry construction as well, but that would be tremendously expensive. In between those two are fabric structures like a bubble, but that are supported by steel girders. So these supported fabric structures kind of come in at the low end of the price point, not quite as low as an air-supported structure, but they have some advantages in terms of useful life. So in talking with our architects and our construction managers, they all felt like the additional investment in the difference between an air-supported fabric structure, and a steel-supported fabric structure would be well worth it in terms of the advantages that you get out of it. And I would just note that SUNY Stony Brook just built such a structure a couple of years ago, I think in 2020, out at their campus in Suffolk County. So, this is definitely a viable option for the board to consider. So, I've shared with you some estimates as we continue to refine for the Berry Hill and Whitman portable replacements. There are more modest approaches and more comprehensive approaches for the board to consider. Obviously, we take direction from you on that. I leave on here some of the things that we've talked about in the past. And of course, the team is here in the audience, and my team here at the stage to answer any questions that you have, and any further homework that we need to do so the board can make its decision.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rogers. Okay. Mr. Greco?
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. I'll try to keep to the 5 questions that I think you want the answers to, and I'll start with the first question, which involves a 7 or a 10-year cycle, and in my view, it should be a 10-year cycle. I think we need to address all 4 of the portables all 4 of the schools that are in need of replacement for those portables, and I think we need to do that all now. As for the sort of the second question about the projects at Whitman and Berry Hill, obviously I'd love to do more expansive projects, but I'm wondering now, I think we have a math problem. We're already at 49 million in just the AVI. We're at 7 million in safety and security, which is another must for me. The 4 portables alone are looking at about 25 million, 25.5 million. So we're at $81.5 million before we even get to address future enrollment growth. I mean, that's obviously a bind, but in my mind, the 81.5 is our base. And, you know, look, the bottom line is every one of us up here inherited this problem, and we inherited this facilities work, but we have to address it. So I want to try to work off of the 81.5, and then the next question now takes us to the Woodbury School. So using it for UPK, to me, is a non-starter. The cost to have 2 pre-K classes there, operating at a loss is not going to be offset by the state aid that we'd get if we convert it into an educational facility. So I think we can refurbish it. I think it would be great as office space. I love the idea of, I think you call it a community room, and I think it's worth it if it can be done. You know, there's been a lot of numbers thrown around for this over the course of the years. The last number I looked at was about $12 million, and I think there's value there because we're going to need that space at Southwoods based on all the projections. The fourth question, anything to add, any kind of additional projects? Look, I think this is a good opportunity to do the air conditioning at every gym district-wide. I think I said that at the last meeting, and I still feel that way. And then with respect to the HPT track and the high school additional gym space, you know, in my mind, I think the HPT track is the more attractive option because it clearly allows for the uniformity among the middle schools. You know, this is obviously something we've always strived for. But, I mean, this is already a very large number. And I just think we need to be very mindful of the costs. We're in a situation right now where almost everything on this list is a must. So that's my take on the questions, and I obviously want to hear what everyone else has to say.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Abramson?
All right, so we're just throwing out all of our points at the same time, and then we're going to talk about it again? Is that how it works? Okay. So I kind of agree with what Brian said. I think that the vestibule, the bus loop, the guidance suites are important. I think that we need to be very mindful of making everything equitable among the schools, which was why the AC in the elementary school and middle school gyms, I think, is more appealing. I think that we talked about when we were replacing the portables +1. I just wanted to confirm that that was the cost that we were given. It was replace the existing portables plus 1 extra classroom. I thought that was something that was included, so I just wanted to confirm that it would be giving extra space when we put the new portables in. I didn't understand, all the costs seem to be the same, whether it were 7-year or 10-year, except for the AC units, and I didn't know if there was a reason for that. And lastly, you talked about if we do the Woodbury School, you talked about leasing space, and if it's a minor number of offices, is there somewhere within the district we can do that instead of leasing space, because they're not going to be in the same facility anyway. Those are my points. Oh, and in terms of equitable, I thought that the HBT track and the tennis courts were important additions because they are not getting the same as Southwoods.
The reason why in our estimates the air conditioning number for gyms was different between the 7-year and 10-year approach was because we assumed that if the board took a 7-year cycle, that the gyms for Berry Hill and Whitman would be subsumed within the more expansive work that was done. So you wouldn't have to do those gyms twice, obviously. So that's the difference between the two estimates.
Dr. Rogers, I'm just going to start with a question about the athletic facility at the high school. The 20,000 square foot structure is turf only? Is it part turf, part hardwood floor? In other words, are we limiting what sports could be played in that area? And would it be feasible to have games in there? Would there be like spectator stands and things like that? Or would it only be, let's say, quote-unquote classroom space for students during the day?
Sorry. So when we were trying to find, Dr. Rufo and I were surfing the internet trying to find an image to put on here, and I found an image that had a ton of volleyball courts, and then I thought it would look like I was trying to steer it towards my preferred sport. So we picked one that had artificial turf instead, but it was only intended to be illustrative. We could put whatever surface, and I believe that when Elite did the cost estimate, that they had a rolled vinyl floor that would be appropriate for things like volleyball or basketball or indoor kind of court sorts of things. So Bethpage has what they call the barn. It is an indoor turfed facility that is a little bit smaller than 20,000 square feet, but they decided to turf theirs. I think for us it would make more sense to have a hard surface in there because it lends itself to more phys ed classes and more of the winter sports, I think, of basketball really, and wrestling where we're really tight. So to me, the hard surface would be the better option. But I picked an illustration that looked like I wasn't trying to put my finger on the scales. Yeah, we talked about bleachers and maybe finding some sort of more portable kinds of bleachers in there so that you could use all of the space but still be able to hold events in there. It would be a larger facility than the existing gym. So for a big game, you'd want to be able to accommodate more spectators in there, and we would see it doing exactly that.
Is it big enough also to section it off, similar to something like Jericho? I know Jericho's area is huge, but could this have multiple games or whatnot going on at the same time?
Yeah, it would be larger than the current high school gym. So that gives you, right now you can run 2 volleyball courts simultaneously in there or 2 slightly shortened basketball courts simultaneously in there. So imagine now 2 full-size basketball courts simultaneously operating. It's about that size.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to run through the questions. I agree with Brian on the 10-year. I think if we're going to look at this, it's very difficult to just focus on 2 schools and cut the other 2 schools out because everything is necessary. I don't want to repeat what everybody is saying, but I would just like to do as much as we can, obviously being as cost effective as possible, but also I want to be careful that we don't complete a project. I can't think of the terminology that I can actually say on the microphone, so just give me a second. Halfway. And then, yes, and then all of a sudden, 5 or 10 years from now, the district has to do another project in order to bring it up fully to what the district needs. In other words, I just want to make sure that we're not wasting any money and that if we're spending a little bit extra money to kind of save money in the future because costs are just going to continuously rise, I think I would just want to be weary of that. As far as Woodbury School, I don't see any benefit in just putting 2 pre-K classrooms in there. I think we have a lot of pre-K classes that are happening in the various schools right now. So in my opinion, I think just keeping it as offices and then the space for community center, continuing education for the teachers, whatever the case may be, I think is the way to go. And I agree also, I mean, it would be great, the HBT track, I would love to do that, but I also think that the additional gym space at the high school, if we had to choose between the 2, that's also very difficult. It's like the 4 schools that require the portables, in my opinion. How do you tell, the HBT students they can't have something, but the high school students will, and vice versa? So I almost, I wish we could just wave a magic wand and say yes, yes, yes to all these things on the list. If we can try to make these things happen, would be great. But it's very difficult for me to, if it comes down to having to choose between the two. And as far as elementary kitchens and whatnot, right now, I think in my eyes, that's kind of a no-brainer to just kind of put that on the side. And also, I'm just going to throw this out there too. We've been back and forth for quite a few meetings on whether or not to use portables or the masonry. And it would be great tonight if we could just kind of eliminate and just focus. In my opinion, the portables are just the way to go. There is nothing negative in my eyes about them. The prefab, yeah, the prefab. So that's how I feel. If everybody just wants to chime in, and then we can not have to talk about that section of this anymore and just kind of move on. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go with the numbers, the questions, 5 questions first. I agree with everybody, 10 years for me. Second one, equitable for all schools. And 3, I'm gonna answer number 3 last. Not yet for the kitchen, but number 5, HBT track, yes. High school gym, yes, yes, yes. And in terms of Woodbury School, it's 12.9, almost $13 million. I feel that we can use that money to do other things and just lease at this point. I don't think we can afford to spend $30 million for office spaces at this point. I'd rather use that money for doing gym AC for all the elementary school and middle schools. So that's where my head is going. And I have a question about the high school, the steel-supported fabric structure. With the weather being the way it is, and we are experiencing, we haven't had this kind of weather in the last 100 years and so on and so forth. What can we expect from having this kind of structure that's not permanent, although it is supposed to be very strong and supported? Will it survive this weird weather system that we are having?
So I'll ask the team from H2M to take that question because they've done a lot more work with this than we have. But as they're coming to the microphone, I'll preface it by saying that was part of the reason why I pointed out that Stony Brook had just constructed one. So obviously they're doing their due diligence and they're in the neighborhood.
So with that structure, you have to build it to the energy conservation code that applies to all buildings. So with that, you're doing your fabric structure on the top, you're doing your insulation that's required to get to the correct R value for any other roof that you would have in any other building, and then you have your fabric structure below to protect that insulation. So you need to follow the same energy conservation code that you have for any traditional building for that building as well.
I'm wondering about this unusual weather that people are experiencing. We don't have tornadoes here, but if there were, will it survive? I'm thinking crazy ideas because we are experiencing crazy weathers.
So based on the zone that we're in, we designed the building based on the different zone we're in. Because this is a school, it's a type 2 location. So everything is built seismically for what the current wind loads would be. Our structural engineer or their structural engineer for Legacy would design that to meet any load requirements, anything possible weather factors that would affect this area.
Just to add a little bit more to that, everything is designed per state code. I understand what you're saying. Sometimes these anomalies, that is what it is, but everything is designed per state code. Whether it's a fabric structure or a masonry structure or a wood structure, it's still designed based off that same code. So it's designed the way it's supposed to be, but obviously with odd factors that go in there. Unfortunately, we can't predict that. We could only go based off, which I would say is probably more like a 100-year kind of, is how we design per the code. So it's all designed the same way.
Okay. I have a couple of questions first. With the prefab building, do they provide us any warranty, Mr. Architects?
Yes, they do.
Well, what's the warranty for?
What was it? 50? 50 years.
They provide us a 50-year warranty? And how do they do that? They leave money in escrow, they have insurance? How do they provide it? They're going to be in business in 50 years? No, I'm being practical.
You spoke to Access, did they speak about their warranty in more detail?
We'll have to get back to you on that one,
Okay.
just to confirm.
And for the facility, the outside gym, well, the steel frame gym, is there ventilation and air conditioning in there?
Yes, again, everything has to meet code, so it's the same emergency requirements, it's the same ventilation. For air conditioning, that's not a requirement, I don't believe that's a requirement for that.
Right.
I'll confirm that, but ventilation, absolutely. And really, again, anything that's required for any other standard building is required for that fabric building as well. As Megan said, the energy requirements are the same.
So would we use that, like, in the winter, and we would need heat? Like, how would that work? That would all be included, okay. Okay, so I guess one of my thoughts, now that we've kind of simmered down to see what some of the numbers are, and I look at kind of the 10-year plan also, but when I'm looking at the number for Berry Hill portables of $14 million, and maybe this is a question more for the board, is that really the best use of $14 million to get 4 classrooms? These numbers seem, on here it says 14.
No, 7 classrooms.
7 classrooms, I mean, but still, we're saying, right, you didn't change it on this one, right, from this one? This is the same thing, right?
Yeah.
The one we sent out?
Yep, Berry Hill is 14.
Yeah, this one, right.
14 for just
Just for the portables, right. So like, if you look at the other ones, Walt Whitman is 3.4 million, Bayless is 3.4, Village is 4.5. Does it justify 3 times the cost? I don't know about that.
Yeah, I think it's worth kind of doing a deep dive. I sort of hit this superficially in my presentation, but as we've gone through the challenges of the Berry Hill site, the cost difference is not so much in the actual classroom structure that's prefabricated and dropped on there. The cost is going to come from getting the site ready to accept that.
Yeah, no, I understand. And here's my concern, too. You can hear me, I'm so loud.
The folks at home.
Yeah, but one of my concerns was, like, I even looked when, on the way here, I drove over there and looked, and like, the left side of the school almost jets out to the property line. The other side goes to the property line. So I don't know if this is the best use of funds to prepare, and I love Berry Hill, believe me, all of this work to I kind of feel like because we have these 10 buildings, we're just trying to squeeze everything in, and it might not be the best use of funds. The break even on the Woodbury School, if that again makes sense, that seems to be a lot of money also. I'm definitely for the library, classrooms, the track, the tennis courts, the additional gym. Obviously, the safety, but I'm concerned that just because we have these buildings, we might have to rethink this and try to find other alternatives where we're more responsible with spending this kind of money. I mean, for $35 million, I'm sure we could build a brand-new school and make it state-of-the-art. I mean, you have to look at it that way. I mean, we're talking a lot of money here, so I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but yeah.
So, again, not to be repetitive, I'm basically, yes, okay, so yes to 10-year. I mean, that's a no-brainer to me to do 4 schools at the same time. I do share some concern on Berry Hill grand total, so I agree with that. So, but I do understand the challenges of the property, so, if we could take a look at it again. I know it's been like your full-time job just on that school. Now, the Woodbury School, though, so just for clarity, so I do agree with the UPK is a non-starter for me, but in that case, am I understanding it correctly, we're not getting any reimbursement from the state then, right, if it's only for the office use?
There might be a little bit of reimbursement for the adult ed space, and what we're trying to research right now is whether the adult ed space has to be connected to a building that has a kid program in it in order to generate aid on the adult ed space. That's unclear to us right now. Dr. Rufo has been working with folks at the state to try and clarify that. The challenge is the state will always ask us to see drawings, and then they'll offer an opinion on the drawings. We don't want to waste money making drawings if it's not going to be something that we want to pursue. So we're trying to get some clarity and some guidance on that, but it's not clear yet. But in any event, I don't think that what little aid we would generate, one way or the other, that's not going to be the thing that should make your decision. That number is going to be small in comparison to all these other much bigger numbers.
And the scope was a non-starter. That was one of the options that was brought up, initially as one of the uses. Is that not viable?
Yeah. Again, the problem with the space is that it's too small, and the basement, which at one time had met code, now is just under 8 feet, and it needs to be 9 feet in order to have kids in there. So you lose all of the square footage that exists in the basement. There's a little bit of square footage that's in the tower, but you'd spend a lot of money on an elevator just to access a couple thousand square feet of space. It wouldn't be a good use of money either. The more we look at the Woodbury School, the more challenging it is to make this 100-something-year-old property function in today's world.
And finally, yes, on the athletic improvements, the turf field at the HBT, and yes, if we could somehow adjust, look more into the grand total, that would be great. I know it could be adjusted there, but also, I know it's not mentioned here, but I would love to kind of like put perhaps on a radar, or back on the radar, our high school auditorium at some point. Maybe include whatever the immediate needs that they really, really is calling for. Because I said that before, and I'll say it again, because it's truly a face of our district. Our high school building is the face of the district, and it's not just about the theater. There are plenty of events that could be held in that auditorium, and look to that a little bit. And, it's that for me.
Okay, so I'll go through the questions. So I am also on board with the 10-year cycle. It makes the most sense. I agree with everybody. I also agree with everybody that we need to do all 4 schools at the same time, that we have to be very mindful of being equitable and treating everybody equally and fairly. I guess I totally hear that that's a big number to finish the Woodbury School, but we would have to put, I don't remember how much it was, but we would have to put money into Southwoods and add there. So I guess that's the opportunity cost. So we're offsetting what we would put into Southwoods into the other building, and I guess making it worthwhile. And I guess it seems to be that the most sense is the community space, the offices and community space. One question I had, even to just get a little bit of reimbursement back. I don't know if the kids can possibly use that community space at nights or on weekends for stuff, and perhaps the clubs can, if the community is making use of that room, maybe that room could also be made for the kids, for club space or whatever, and maybe that would help get us reimbursed and give the kids additional space, if that makes sense. So I am totally okay putting the elementary kitchens on pause. I would love to do air conditioning for the gyms, because I think that that would be helpful for the kids and for so many things that go on in there. I am good doing the track, and I think it's the high school additional gym space, I think given how many kids are coming through our schools and how many children are not able to join teams, that I think that extra space is extraordinarily important. So if we could do the gym space, I think that that would be really beneficial to the kids. I think the kids are in desperate need of extra space for so many reasons, and I think it's a disservice to them that so many kids don't have an opportunity to play on the sports teams. So I think that we need the space that we can get for the kids. Did I miss anything? If I missed anything, you can come back, but I think I got it.
Thanks. I'm going to start with a couple of questions, Dr. Rogers. Am I right to understand that all of the portable replacements increase the number of classrooms at the end of it, or are some of them replacement like for like?
So when we did the estimating, we were estimating adding one. I think if we get into more refinement, we'll go beyond just sort of a square foot times a number, sort of an estimate. I don't know, Kevin or Megan, if you want to go a little bit deeper into how you developed some of those estimates.
So when we were looking at that, with doing 2 additional classrooms for it to be balanced on each side, you also have to show that you have a need for the additional classroom space. If you're not showing your enrollment is growing at those schools, you won't receive funding for that space you're adding on. So right now, the intent at Village and Bayless is just to do a replacement in kind, because right now you're not showing any enrollment growth in those spaces, so we don't believe that the state will give funding on those additional classrooms. For the 4 classrooms, yes. For the 4 schools, for Berry Hill, the addition would be 7 classrooms. For Walt Whitman, it would be 4 classrooms. For Bayless, it would be 2 classrooms. And for Village, it would be 4 classrooms.
How many are currently in Walt Whitman and Berry Hill? So is it?
Berry Hill has 7. With the original plan, if we did the more expansive one, it would be looking to convert the multipurpose room into 2 classrooms. If we're not moving forward with the expansion, the expansive plan, we should be looking to do 9 classrooms in that addition, not 7.
So it would be, there's 7 currently?
Correct.
And no matter what plan, we would have at least 9 classes?
If we're not doing the expansive plan, we should be doing 9 classrooms at Berry Hill for the +2 that would be needed for the enrollment growth.
Okay, and at Whitman?
Whitman has 4.
And you'd be adding 4? So you'd just be,
So you have existing 3 at Walt Whitman, and you would be doing a total of 4, so +1.
+1, okay.
Sure. So actually, that confused me a little bit. So assuming the base $14 million Berry Hill plan, the knocking down the portable and adding additional classrooms is net additive of classrooms or net neutral of classrooms? For just the base case, the 14 million base case at Berry Hill.
It would be +2.
Thank you. One other question, Dr. Rogers, about the portable replacement plans. The way we have the base cases, I made this point for Village and Bayless, it doesn't, it's simplistic, but the expanded plans, if we were to do the basic plans first, would it stop us from then potentially in the future doing the larger expansion plans, or are they unrelated?
No, I think it's actually an advantage of the plan that H2M came up with for both Berry Hill and for Whitman, that by locating the new pre-manufactured classrooms in a different spot from the existing portables, it leaves you with the option of whatever you want to locate on that pad in the future, you can do. So with both of those, the plan that we worked on, so here at Whitman, if you were to do a new gym, it would go where the old portables were. So you can build the 4 new classrooms on the north end of the building immediately, and use the 3 existing portables. Maybe you'd have some overlap there. Nothing's going to force you to knock them down until we're sure that we don't want to occupy them anymore. And then at some point in the future, after you do knock them down, you have that space available to do the rest of the project, the gym, the cafeteria. And Berry Hill would work in the same way. What we've shown here is an addition that would have 7 classrooms in it. I think what Ms. Bellata was saying was if you want to accommodate enrollment growth there and you're not going to do the gym, then you can't take the current all-purpose room and convert it into 2 more classrooms. So perhaps you'd want to consider a 9-classroom wing. But I think the question I would ask is, our enrollment projections show Berry Hill cresting and then coming back down again. So maybe it's not necessary to build that much extra capacity if you don't have to knock the portables down immediately. So you could have them operating in parallel for a little while, 7 new spaces. You don't have to knock down the 7 old spaces right away. Maybe those 2 spaces simultaneously get you over the hump. And then we'll also have a better view of what our future enrollment looks like and can make a more refined decision 3 years from now. The only downside is inflation.
Okay, so thank you for that. So to go down the list of questions, I'm actually a little bit confused by the board's unanimity about why 10 years is obviously a superior planning range to 7. It actually, to my way of thinking, it limits our flexibility in the sense that we're projecting 10 years into the future as opposed to leaving us the flexibility to revisit in 5 years what would end up expiring at the end of 2 additional. So it's not clear to me at all that 10 years is a vastly superior window to be reviewing this. And even further, what it does by trying to use a 10-year window is to expand the list of projects that we would need to fit into this additional bond issuance, which actually the way I've been listening is we're trying to race to get all the way to the end of this with check marks. And to my way of thinking, we're actually being overly aggressive in a way that doesn't match our needs necessarily. So for example, I heard a lot of folks saying we have to treat all the elementary schools equitably by making sure we do all the portables at the same time, but the needs aren't the same. So South Grove, Robbins Lane, they don't need additional portables, so they're not participating in portable replacements. And the Whitman and Berry Hill replacements are the urgent ones in the short term. So, and those are the ones with the enrollment growth. So if anything, those are really where we should be focusing in the short term, in my opinion. So from my point of view, I'd much rather be thinking in a 7-year shorter cycle so that we preserve our flexibility. In that case, I would not be as excited to replace the portables in the first 7-year cycle at Bayless and at Village, since they're in better condition, but because of the need for expansion and our ability to prove that we need to expand in a shorter time frame at Berry Hill and Whitman seems to me to be the better course. In terms of whether or not we would do the expanded one or not, I think further discussion. The fact that we don't stop ourselves from doing it at a later date, from my point of view, means that in the short term we can just do the additional wing replacements because it doesn't cut off sort of the tail in the future. Further, if I look down the list and I reframe this in terms of time and in terms of necessity in the shorter term, I look at the Syosset High School 5 additional classrooms. I think we have the most amount of time for the high school in terms of the progression of the number of students through the district. So actually that's the thing that requires the least amount of early commitment because the number of students at the high school shows up last. So for me, that's the thing I would wait on in the first cycle and see if there are other ways that we can figure out how to accommodate additional enrollment besides adding additional classrooms today. And then if I walk backwards using that logic, that means that the middle schools are the place where the enrollment growth shows up first. So solving Southwood's enrollment and additional resources at HBT would seem to me to be the higher priority. So tracks and gyms at HBT and the classroom reconfiguration, obviously, at Southwoods. And then the question that I have around the Woodbury School is we had earlier tried to estimate some forms of break-evens in terms of how far out into the future lease payments would equilibrate. Now it looks like 13 million is the most recent thought process about the Woodbury School. Am I right to think it's approximately 20 years? So in other words, in my mind, if you said the break-even is 50 years, I would say, wow, that's clearly too long. And if you said the break-even was 3 years, I'd say that's a no-brainer. Let's do it in 3 years, right? But somewhere in the range of 15 to 20 to 25, it's sort of more of an open question. So having a little better clarity around that concept would help me be more firm about whether or not 13 million for the Woodbury School was something that we needed to sort of duke out here, because it sounds like there's a little bit of back and forth, not consensus necessarily around that. Other things to talk about further down the list, I don't see elementary and middle school ACs as a high priority. I think it's great. I think it's a nice to have, not a need to have. And again, I'm being conscientious about we're starting at 50 million. Everything we add on to that gets us to 100 million plus in a hurry. And in my mind, I sort of have a hard stop at 100 million as, gosh, that's about as far as I can stare into this without getting a significant amount of agita. So with that in mind, again, dating back to the earlier comment about the high school being the enrollment growth where we buy ourselves more time because it's the last, I would punt additional gym space in the high school to a time frame 7 years out when we're reviewing it again on a 7-year cycle. So I'm just curious about why the board seems to be unanimous about 10 years being a better view than a shorter term, more flexible strategic planning window.
Jack, because I love talking to you, let me try to respond to some of this, because I've struggled with the difference between 7 and 10 as well. And the way I see it, the 10 years is acknowledging that all 4 schools that have portables need to be replaced. The 7-year is basically saying that we only need to do 2 now, and we'll do the other 2 at the end of the 7 years in another round. So that really is the only difference and the only reason why we're choosing between 7 and 10. So in the 7, you get to replace 2 one at Whitman, 1 at Berry Hill, and then you do the more expansive plan at both of those schools. And in a vacuum, that sounds like the better move. The problem is, in a vacuum, that's a $40+ million project at 2 schools, when we're already sitting at about 60-something million in, we have to do them. So I think the 10-year is not a function of, at least in my opinion, it's not a function of wanting to have to wait for the next round. It's a function of the only reason we're talking about 7 is to do massive projects at just 2 of the 10 buildings. So that's the point that I tried to make when I spoke first. The other idea of equitable treatment of elementary schools, I didn't really hear people talking about it with respect to the portables. I think it was, we have 4 schools with portables, and that's crazy. We shouldn't have 4 schools with portables. We should have 0 schools with portables. The equitable issue came up more with respect to the air conditioning, where every school would have gym air conditioning. But again, that may have been how I heard it. And then with respect to the high school, I agree with you that the high school bubble is going to hit last, but whether it's a 7-year or a 10-year timeframe, this is going to ramp up. So if, Dr. Rogers, you could remind me, I think it was 5 to 7 years we expect the bubble, 5 to 8, whatever the number is, it's going to ramp up into that date, in which case the extra 5 classrooms has to be done now, or at least has to be bonded now, to be done at some point to be ready for that. So those are my thoughts.
So I don't think that if we thought about doing 2 elementary schools today, that would necessitate that we are locked into doing the larger programs. We could do smaller programs knowing that the option to do larger programs at those schools is not foreclosed in the future, the way Dr. Rogers explained the portable deconstruction and the additional wings. So I don't think it requires us to spend $40 million today on those 2 schools. I think it allows us to preserve an option into the future, which I think, as from a professional and personal standpoint, I like to accumulate free options, so and not expire them. So from the standpoint of creating an optionality for myself, that's just professional experience. But to the point of classrooms in the high school and further down the high school, I think we have 7 to 9 years before the bulk of the students hit the high school. But that doesn't mean that if we revisit 5 years down the road in our 7-year cycle, that we then don't look forward and say, okay, our projections turns out that they are accurate 7 to 9 years in the future, and we do need to move our feet to start adding classroom space in the high school, as opposed to now deciding today, immediately, that our projections in the future, and by the way, I know our demographic projections are much more accurate in the longer term, given that we know how many kindergartners there were in 2021. In other words, we have a higher probability of that projection coming accurate. I guess my point to you is, it's not necessarily clear to me today that we need to immediately go and affect those constructions, as opposed to the middle schools, the elementary schools, which today need those to start, because we already know those students are, in the much shorter term, going to roll through those schools first.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm just going to give my 2 cents, revolving all these questions, because it's 10 cents, not 2. So far we've heard from everyone already. Everyone's got their round. So I'm just going to share my opinion on this. With regard to the first one, the 7-year or the 10-year, I do think that the 10-year makes more sense at this point for several reasons. And as we know, the ABI, that can't be touched, and that's their safety, security, that's definitely going to be the first. And then with the portables, I would really, really want to replace the other 2 elementary school portables, just so that we could use them, but if we can replace them all at this time, it's for the cost saving, for number 1. And number 2,
One thought that I had before was that I actually like Dr. Rogers' idea of not knocking down the Berry Hill, so that I know we have special programs that hop from school to school from year to year, and then we can use, if we don't use them for enrollment growth, we can actually use these portables that we don't knock down. We have new ones, but we don't knock down the existing ones. Right now, we can use them for different various purposes, and so if somebody actually mentioned the SCOPE program, and we can use those for these purposes too. So that was one of the benefits, and also, let me just see that for the Woodbury School, this is a very the cost is high. I agree with some of the board members who mentioned about the cost, and I've seen the cost rising from year to year. It went from 3 to 6 and now to over 10. It just goes from year to year, and then if we don't do it now, I don't know if we do it 5, 10 years later, it might be $25 million. So that's one, and then another thing is that it's interrelated with a lot of enrollment growth, because then we can vacant the Southwoods Business Wing, and that's going to clear up a few classrooms, because right now Southwoods at the enrollment height, and that's peak, and we need classrooms right away. And then by vacating these classrooms, we can just use them right away. We don't have to go through portables or buildings or approvals from state ed. It's right there for us to use. So for me, it's a hard decision, but I would have to go with just for using it for office space, office community, not for classrooms. And then this way we can make use of the space at the Southwoods. I love the idea of elementary kitchen, but at this point, it's not something that I would consider, because we have other higher priorities. And for air conditioning, I would go for air conditioning at elementary schools who don't have it yet. Because that space, as we know, we are at this space constraint, and if we could have the AC in the gym, we can use that space for a lot of uses. Let's say for moving up, we don't have to worry about weather. We can use the gym space for moving up in hot summer days. So this way, and then it's also creating what we were talking about, equity amongst all elementary schools in this case. And then as for I would love to do everything on this list, but I also want to be very cognizant about the bond, the amount of the bond, and I would like to see how much we would add first before we go on with additional projects. I love the HBT track, also the high school additional gym, but I would really want to see where we're at first before we adding more and more to the list. That's just my 2 cents, same as everyone else. And then now that we've all gone the round, I don't know if anyone has any additional questions based on what we discussed so far, or if Dr. Rogers has anything else to add. Susan had her hand up first, so I'm gonna with Ms. Falco.
So I just wanted to get clarification on the high school, because my understanding currently is that the high school is literally bursting at the seams, that all of the classes are full, and that kids who want to switch from one class to another for whatever reason can't get into a class because it's all full already. And it's a huge problem that hasn't been this way ever before in my experience or many other people's experience. And it's a huge scheduling issue for many of the children, and they're getting shut out of things they want to take, or if they're having a problem with their schedule or they need to change it, they're not able to. And and the high school isn't even at the peak. I also want to clarify how many years away from the estimated peak we are, because my understanding was within the 7 years, we would hit the peak. So we would need to plan now, because otherwise we're not going to be prepared in the high school for when the peak comes. And to be quite honest, I can't imagine putting any more kids into that building than are already there without doing something about it.
So when Jack asked the question, I wanted to be able to answer not off the top of my head, but with the data, and this I don't have memorized. So Dr. Laversa was kind enough to go fetch my laptop for me. Thank you, Ray. So Brian's frame is the right frame. The enrollment is ramping up, and that ramp is going to occur it won't all arrive at once. And I'm looking at the ramp, and it's actually fairly steep in the early years. So we did bring one new classroom online this year. We converted a large closet, and that classroom was immediately programmed for the whole day. So we are already tight at the high school, to the other comments. And the enrollment peak comes in 2030, and that it would be 289, almost 300 kids over where we're at now. But even 2 years before that, in 2028, you're at 265 above where we are now. So the difference between, although it's not the peak, the difference between those two numbers is not significant. And so as I think about 7-year window, 10-year window, how long it will take to construct new classroom space at the high school, you will take advantage of that space the moment you will commission it. But to get the space done, you'll have a vote. It won't happen in 2023. It will take us, after the vote, a year to get through the approval process with the state ed department. It will take us, that project will probably take 2 years to construct, would be my guess, because of the complexity of working inside the courtyard. So at best, I think you're 3.5 years out from being able to really use that space. So in those 3.5 years will be plus 75 kids next year, plus 110, plus 180, plus 207. So we'll already be tight until that space is commissioned. I don't think that you'll have the luxury of being able to consider this in another round of funding. If the goal is to meet the need at the high school, this would be the time to do it.
Mr. Rotolo?
Jack, with that throwing out that $100 million number, but keep in mind that of that $100 million number, we'll probably get maybe conservatively $30 million back from the state aid, construction aid. I don't know, am I wrong by saying that, architects? Oh, I know, but I'm just saying we will.
No.
Is that a fair number to say, taking into account that all of it is not going to be?
Right. Not all of it is aidable. We're using a number of, say, 85% of it might be aidable. And of that 85%, we would get 42% aid. So that's going to be 32-ish. Yeah, your ballpark. And actually, I like a more conservative number, so I'll take your 30.
Okay. So that's what I'm saying. So just keep in mind that we will get, no, but I'm saying just throwing 100 million just to make sure we're going to get 30 million back.
So if we spend 200 million, we'll get 30% back. I mean,
Yeah, well, that's a big deal. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Ms. Edmondson, please.
I agree with Susan about the school. It's very tight. I also, I just wanted to make another point about the Berry Hills additions that we didn't bring up tonight. I know it's expensive. I know that it's a very difficult school, but the fact that people with any sort of disability can't get to the playground is a huge problem. So I know this looks more expensive, but I think there's a gigantic benefit to it. So I think we have to take that into account when we look at the number, because right now they can't, and I think that's a big problem and a miss.
To add to your point, when I went back, and I didn't realize it was 9 classrooms at Berry Hill. So at 9 classrooms, if you take the average of the classrooms that we're adding and the cost, they're all approximately the same. I mean, they're not, it's not, let's put it this way, it's not way out of line, but you're building 9 classrooms. Almost, probably the most expensive one then would be Bayless, because you're only building 2. So per classroom, trying to look at it per classroom.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, Mr. Ostrich?
I did want to ask a clarifying question, which is the problem of scheduling and classrooms in the high school, is that a function of the total square footage, Or is it a function of the number of classes that are being scheduled at the high school? In other words, to be even more plain, there's a certain number of students in the high school, just like there's a certain number of students in the elementary schools, the middle schools, et cetera. And if we take the square footage of the building and divide it by the number of students, or we take the number of classrooms divided by the number of students, is the problem the absolute number of square footage, or is the problem the number of classes that are being scheduled that use those classrooms?
So I'm going to ask Dr. Curry to work on this with you a little bit. One of Dr. Curry's most ambitious responsibilities is working on staffing with the high school. So she, in the spring, works with the high school administration and literally works down to 0.2 FTE, which is one teacher teaching one class a day, level of granularity in how we schedule the high school. And the staffing actually drives this conversation because one teacher, one classroom staffing. So this is the best lens on which to take this.
So the conversation actually does begin with students and the students' course selection. So after that takes place, we sit and the high school team does extensive data review and going within the guidelines, but also keeping, in fact, that the guidelines would be the maximum, taking into account that the primary goal is to provide every class that the students want and have them have the ability to be in those classes. That being said, we also want to be fiscally prudent, that if there is a class where 2, 3, 5, 7 students have signed up, we take a deeper look and determine if that course is offered at another point in time in their high school career, or if it in fact is what we would call a singleton, and it would be their only opportunity to take that class. So that would be some of the layers of decision making that go into determining if classes will be run. And we also take into consideration historical data. We take a look at past years, and we see have students who've signed up for classes, what is the retention rate, what is the drop rate, what are the safety parameters. For example, students who want to challenge themselves by taking courses at a higher academic level, we don't want them to feel trapped there if in fact by their aspirations they've taken on more than they can handle. So we always want to make sure that there are opportunities for movement if in fact they change their mind or if they're struggling. So these factors and many others come into play in determining what courses will run. And off the top of my head, this year, I believe there may have been only 1 or 2 courses that didn't have enough student enrollment in order for us to run the class this year. But again, opportunities down the road before the students would graduate would possibly be available, again, showing student interest. So all of those factors go into play, and then we start crunching the numbers based upon contractual regulations with how many classes teachers can teach, as far as when they're offered, and also based on their certifications. All of those pieces coming into play, we start taking a look at FTE numbers and really managing how many sections we need. The guidance department plays a big role, again, in running these numbers and making sure that we're not running conflicts. Oftentimes, because of the aspirations of students, there are classes that may only be offered as a singleton, and a child or a student would want to be taking maybe 2 or 3 of those. So it's very important that we're not offering them at the same time period during the day in order to maximize the potential that students can get all of the classes they would like. Once we've done that, again, the guidance department then meets with the students and making sure that the schedule is aligned in the manner that they would like that, bearing in mind that there might be changes that as students reconsider, because this is months in the making. So courses students have signed up for in January, by March, April, May, they might be reconsidering, especially as they get into 11th and 12th grade and they're really refining their ultimate goals towards college. So again, wanting to have those opportunities available to them. So all that being said, we then sit down and we start taking a look at how many courses are offered. And if we were to get into the granular conversation, a class that's offered every single day is considered 0.2 FTE, or if you're looking at a teacher, it's 20% of their assignment. Then there are courses that are offered every other day that would be 0.1 FTE, and then there are some that are offered even on a more granular level of alternating every other day. So there's a lot of different mathematics that go into that, and each teacher, each full-time teacher is considered 1.0 FTE, and therefore would be typically teaching 5 periods a day to fulfill that full-time teaching equivalent. While we're doing that, we're also cross-referencing the high school with the middle school needs, because oftentimes there are courses that are being taught in both of those schools that would require specific teacher certification, and therefore we take into consideration shared teachers. All that being said, we then calculate how many courses we need to run, how many teachers we need to have that have specific certifications in that area. We then take a look at the pool of teachers we have, and also in consideration the pool of teachers that are putting in perhaps to retire that year, in which cases which certifications we'd have to be hiring for. And putting all of that math together, by the time we leave going into end of June, July, we have a very preliminary schedule out there. The students are then given their schedules. In the middle of July, I believe, they're released, and then the conversations start happening with guidance counselors for the various changes. So trying to make that as short as possible, that's an awful lot of what goes into it, making sure we also have room, because many changes will happen September and October when students are trying it and realizing they need to make adjustments that would be in their best interest, putting their best foot forward to be successful. Thank you.
Dr. Curry, I'm going to ask you to just put a finer point on it to try and get at where I think Mr. Ostrick was going, which is, are there places where there are inefficiencies in how the high school is scheduled that if we were more efficient, we might free up a classroom or something like that? The two thoughts that occurred to me are, one, and you made this point, there are some classes that are not completely maxed out because they are the drop-down class. Like an honors class, you might want to have a couple of spaces in some other classes at the same period of the day, so you'd have room to go into that class if you drop down. And yes, they do plan for that. And a lot of the classes, and we looked at this actually when we did the exercise of splitting into 2 high schools, the classes that typically have very low enrollments are classes that are designed around extra help or special populations, and those tend to be the small classes. Yes, there are a handful of classes that are just electives, and there are only a handful of kids that want to take them, and sometimes we decide that those won't run. But by and large, and Dr. Curry, maybe you could just make sure that I haven't missed a special population, the classes that are occupying a room but aren't occupying a room fully are going to be classes that are helping special populations of learners.
Correct. Also, that we, and the high, I say we, but the high school team is very strategic on placing classes in rooms that would be appropriate for the size and the enrollment of students, so that we're not placing a smaller group in a room that could carry a larger group of students. The one other point I want to mention is that in order to be fiscally responsible in running courses of an appropriate size, we also have opportunities for independent study. That when a student is wanting to take a course or to pursue a course of study that we're not able to run a full class, that we offer that opportunity that they can work independently with a teacher and still go through the course and accrue that credit while we're not taking up a full 0.2 or 1.1 FTE. The high school has just about 100 classrooms, and I would say that within 97% throughout the 9-period days, you will find each and every one of those classrooms at maximum capacity as appropriate for the courses that we're running there. You're not going to find classrooms that are half full.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that point, my understanding is there are some classes at the high school that actually have no choice but meet in other spaces other than actual classrooms. That's correct? Like the library, like the spillover spaces.
If that does happen, it is not the norm, but we also want to make sure we're not turning any student away that wants to be a part of the course. But we do make sure that all of the resources, the technology, and all the materials would be necessary, that students aren't lacking simply because we've had to provide an alternate space.
Okay, all right, so Dr. Rogers, do you have all the information you needed from the board, or do you want to,
I do. I want to respond to some more questions, and you did give me more homework. So Mr. Ostrick asked about the Woodbury School and our previous calculations of when there was a break-even point. We've redone the break-even analysis at the current costs, and we made a guess as to what we think rental rates are going to do. But even with fairly aggressive guesses, the break-even point is approaching 40 years. So it's an expensive way to do office space. But we also recognize that it's a community asset. And I also recognize that there's still a cost associated with not doing anything with the building as well. That cost doesn't go away either. But it's not as easy to say, this is your point. If it was a 3-year payback period, it'd be a no-brainer. At this kind of a payback period, you have to have other things that are motivating you, I think, to consider the project as well as just the finances.
Ms. Falkov?
Just a question. So when you did the break even on that, I think it was like $2 million to knock the building down or $1 million to knock it down. So if you took the $2 million that we would have to spend away from the renovation cost, would the break even still be 40 years? Or is that how you did it? Or you didn't do that?
Yeah, we did it both ways. It was a little over 40 and a little under 40 if you said that's a sunk cost already. And Dr. Rufo put an inflation factor in there. I don't know what number she picked, but I'm sure it was the perfect number. And she went to CBRE analysis of what a Class B office space goes for in the neighborhood, et cetera. We're trying to give you a fair apples to apples kind of a comparison.
Okay, all right, so Mr. Ostrick?
I just wanted to close the loop and make the final point, which is I think I have a better understanding of the classroom space. So from the standpoint of adding 5 additional classrooms, I think it's a reasonable cost to entertain, provided that we also then consider additionally ways that we can have non-building additional space to potentially trim and manage our classroom flow, understanding that there is a significant number of classes that are for special populations. That's understandable. I guess what I have a visceral reaction to is throwing money at solving the problem without using other things, other tools at our disposal, including having other choices or fewer choices available, not just adding to the pile as our first and only option for solving any problem. So I feel like in our observations and discussions, it feels like our first instinct is to add to the pile, and I'd like us to spend a lot more time also considering the or half of every problem, which isn't just the and half, right? So there's the and part, which is adding to everything, and there's the or part, which is, yeah, we can't actually have everything. So that's all.
I hope this comment will reassure you. The high school is going to increase by over 10%. So if there are roughly 100 classrooms at the high school, then a 10% enrollment increase would presumably result in an additional 10 classrooms worth of space. But we are only proposing, in this instance, to build 5. So we are actually constraining ourselves to do exactly what you're suggesting by not building to the entire amount of what we anticipate is coming. Obviously, we'll want to be agile, and we'll need to be able to come back to the board if we were too modest in our approach. But to your point, rather than build for the entire projection for where we're going to be, 5 classrooms gets us started with the bubble that we know we have coming, and it gives us the opportunity to look and see if there are places where we can be more efficient, because 5 classrooms is not 10.
All right, that sounds good. So Dr. Rogers, the board has given you lots and lots of answers, and then also raised lots and lots of questions too. And I'm sure this is not going to be the last facilities discussion we have, so we will be discussing more at future meetings, and then the board will continue to study, to understand, and then to raise more questions at future meetings for you. Sure. Okay. All right, so with that, can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Ms. Levitan, second by Mr. Greco. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.